So if you've been in or around the Deltarune community after the releases of chapters 3 and 4 recently, a common theory you may have seen or heard is that Susie is actually not a part of the heroes of the prophecy. This theory gives Susie the role of more of the girl in the prophecy. If you don't know, that's another verse in the prophecy. And last was the girl, but last was the girl. Because obviously the girl and the second hero are not the same person by how they're worded. Some people may argue they are. I would still argue they aren't. Now, this theory states that the second hero could be someone else, with a lot of people voicing Noelle could be the second hero. And this is a theory that many people either agree or disagree with. Probably being the one that most argued about, similar to like how much Chris Knight was before Chapter 3. I would say on a lesser scale, but still argued quite a bit within the community. Now, I have to be honest, this theory has a lot of merit to it on its own right, but at the same time, the evidence against it is pretty extremely strong, that I haven't really came to a conclusive thought on this theory. So, I'm going to list out the evidence for and against the theory, and you can decide for yourself on this theory whether you agree or disagree, and I will decide. So let's start with the evidence for this theory, as it'll help us establish the theory more, and then we can refute it, obviously, right? The first piece of evidence for this theory comes from the picture of the second hero itself, being that the picture doesn't fully look like Susie from the prophecy, and the monster in the photo also wields a sword, which obviously Susie wields an axe instead of a sword in the game. A lot of people also say that the monster in the photo looks like they're wearing like a robe of some kind. To be honest, I don't really see that. I don't really see them wearing a robe. And now if you're going as far to say that the second hero is supposed to be Noelle, a lot of people argue that in the recent chapters in the files, you can see Noelle that can equip a sword. The Jingle Blade, which you get from the Holiday Manor by stealing a candy cane pencil, I think. Now, in my opinion, this is probably the weakest piece of evidence for this theory. As you'll see later when we get to the evidence against it, it's probably the one to pick apart the most. This is more of setting the groundwork for the theory, though, and then people usually get more stronger evidence for it. The next piece of evidence for this theory comes from the prophecy as well. Specifically, the one further on in the Dark World, where it states, "And last was the girl, at last was the girl." This part of the prophecy has a very interesting symbol representing it, being the Rude Buster symbol. As we all know, that is the magic attack Susie can use. Now, I thought at first, that this was just the axe symbol. And I think many people did as well, but in the files it is labeled as a Rude Buster, so I think it's safe to say that it is representing the Rude Buster symbol, unless there is evidence of the axe symbol being labeled Rude Buster in the files, but I don't really know how to look at the files, so someone else would have to do that. But love finds its way to the girl is also part of this prophecy as well. Also with the Rude Buster symbol. Obviously parroting how Noelle likes Susie, right? So love finding its way to the girl is Noelle finding her love to Susie. Am I wording that right? I don't even know. But we all knew that by now that that's the canonical ship, right? And this piece of the prophecy is pretty strong evidence, it's really strong evidence. Being the girl, which, again, Susie is a girl also, being labeled with the Rude Buster and love finding its way to the girl is very specific to, Susie or kind of Noelle also in the same way. The last piece of evidence that I found researching for this video is Ralsei's mention of how Susie was supposed to equip ribbons. This comes at the end of Susie's Dark World in Chapter 4. Now, obviously, if you support that Noelle is the second hero, this would immediately jump out to you, right? Because Noelle can equip ribbons, and she has really interesting dialogue about that, probably one of the most interesting things she can equip. Also, I did also see one other piece of evidence, just a quick side tangent, about the ice door in Chapter 3's weird route. Sword route, not weird route. It's part of the main route, kind of, where it's there's 4 triangles on the ice door, 3 of them are facing up, and the extra one making the girl in the prophecy. However, not really gonna talk about that here, because I don't know if this really affects the normal route, because the sword route has many implications to the weird route, And the 4 triangles, like the 3rd extra up triangle, could just be making Noelle into a hero or something. That's why there's 4 on that one specifically. I'm not going to talk about that one because sword route is more heavily tied to the weird route than the normal route, so I don't really know if it's quite evidence for this theory necessarily. So let's talk about the evidence against this theory, as there's a lot going on that needs to be talked about against this theory. So I'm just going to start with the obvious and say that the prophecy of the 2nd hero looks more like Susie than Noelle or any other monster. I'm sorry, I don't know even what you're talking about, like that some people online argue. I think it pretty much looks like Susie. I don't think it's a robe, I think it's supposed to be her jacket, really. Honestly. The monster has a very distinct facial structure in the prophecy and build to Susie, and I think it's just kind of like looks like her, pretty much. And the fact that she wields a sword is interesting, but also, let's tie this into the Gerson, right? Because Gerson mentions how Susie has the pen to change fate, the white pen of hope or something. While you could say it's metaphoric, obviously, it could also be literal. Now, Chris's sword in the Dark World is a sword, and in the Light World is a pencil. That's the duality of it. To say, and who's to say really that a pen couldn't either especially be a sword either. And a quill pen actually is a weapon in the Dark World. It gets turned into the Wingblade item. So obviously pens can be swords in the Dark World. I also think that this dialogue in the fight is very literal, kind of. Because Susie specifically mentions after that about how Chris probably wields that pen and how her weapon's just a hairbrush. Which could be, I'm not saying it's definite, it probably might be that it's referring to her first weapon in the Dark World being the main axe, being a hairbrush, because main has stuff to do with hair, and, well, I don't think her hair turned into a weapon. I think it's probably a hairbrush. So, with that being said, I think it's very possible that Susie could equip a sword later on that's a pen in the Light World. And I don't think that's really that far of a long shot to say. Still talking about the prophecy of the 2nd mural, the text over it states, the 2nd hero, the girl with hope crossed on her heart. Now, honestly, again, in my opinion, this one's more opinionated because you can't really be objective on this necessarily, but I would argue that Susie has more hope than any other Deltarune character, to be honest. And I don't think there's anyone else with hope crossed on their heart. Especially, I think Susie would have it more than Noelle, I'm sorry. But Chapter 4 clearly, very much clearly showcases that Susie has the chance to change fate from her hope alone and her own ambition. But I am getting a little ahead of myself, I won't talk about that. However, the girl in the prophecy is very interesting and needs to be addressed. Of course, and last was the girl, at last was the girl. Obviously, some people say that the 2nd hero and the girl could be the same, right? But I don't think, as the wording of the prophecy makes it really does seem like they aren't the same. Like, some people could argue that they are. To be honest, I think the girl is probably just Noelle. I know it's represented by the Rudebuster symbol. I get it, right? Pretty heavy evidence that it could be Susie. But who is Noelle connected to the most? Yeah, it's Susie. And I do think it really could just be represented by the fact that she's heavily connected to Susie. That's why she's represented by the Rudebuster symbol. I don't think it's that far of a stretch to say that the girl is Noelle, even though it's the Rudebuster symbol, because the evidence for the theory trying to argue that the girl with hope crossed on her heart that has a suspicious Susie shape is not Susie makes less sense to me, in my opinion. I think you could argue that the 2nd hero is more Susie than you could argue that the girl was Susie. If you get what I'm getting at, sorry. That's a little off script there. But, yeah. The last thing I want to talk about against this theory is the fact that I don't think the story would be as good without Susie as one of the heroes. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because it just doesn't sound great that the prophecy was broken just because Susie was there instead of someone else, because of pure coincidence. In my head, it doesn't sound like we or any of the characters did anything to change the prophecy, and it was just broken because Susie ate chalk was forced to go to the supply closet instead of someone else. And I don't think the prophecy would be that easily broken, or it would be very satisfying to break if it was a coincidence. I also think that this theory kind of ruins Susie's character development in a way. And I think it's a lot more satisfying if Susie breaks the prophecy of her own will instead of just her happening to be there. Susie clearly has a big role to play in the story. You can't even argue against that, obviously. And she's probably going to be the character who changes the fate of the ending of Deltarune. And this is especially seen through dialogue in the Gerson fight. I don't think it's going to be just because it's a coincidence. I think it's going to be out of her own hope. And the dialogue with Ralsei talking about how Susie being able to equip ribbons, right? I don't think it's trying to show that she isn't part of the prophecy. I think it's hinting that Susie has the power to change things no matter how small they are. And she has the ability to change fate in a way. And I think that could be on a larger scale to change the whole game, obviously. And equipping ribbons is just hinting at the fact that she can break the prophecy and get out of that. So going into this video, I didn't know what conclusion or outcome I would have. I was really on the fence. But as you can probably tell on my outcome to this video, I think Susie is the second hero in the prophecy. And I don't think it'll make sense if she wasn't, really. I think the girl with hope crossed on her heart is pretty obviously referring to her. And I think that the evidence against the theory is stronger for it. It's an interesting theory, and if you believe it, that's great, obviously. But I feel like the evidence against it is stronger than the evidence for it. And it's really up to you whether you believe this theory or not. And please tell me if I missed anything, because there's a lot of details in this game that I could have missed pointing towards this theory. So a lot of details in Deltarune. I looked at like multiple people talking about this theory, and I tried to gather the evidence for it. A lot of people obviously just echoed the same thing. But tell me if I missed anything, or tell me if you thought this theory was, if you agree with this theory or disagree. Obviously I disagree, but of course everyone has their own opinions. And thank you for watching this video. I was struggling with coming up with a video idea actually when but then I was like looking on like social media, and I saw someone talking about this theory, and then I remembered hearing about it like a month ago, I think from a Spooky Dude video, and I remember not being able to really come to a conclusion. Usually, sometimes in theory videos, I just come out walking away like not even thinking about the counter evidence, but to this one, I was thinking about it, like post part of it, and I don't know, it just didn't really sit right in my head. This theory actually turns out I'm very passionate about, and I've actually never had this much of an opinion on a theory before. Yeah, I really don't usually have strong opinions. Like, if Chris was the knight, either way, I think it could have worked. But Susie not being one of the heroes, it just doesn't really sound great in my head and kind of goes against her character, because she's probably one of the best characters in the game, not gonna lie. And I do, thankfully, though, have an idea for a video next week, so that's good. So I'm more prepared than normal. And so make sure to stay tuned if you want to see that. Subscribe, to get it recommended more likely. Yeah, I know. I'm plugging my channel now. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.